All right, well, typical potluck Sunday morning. Everybody's a little bit late, making their final preparations for food.
Oh, there's a potluck today.
I think, right? Potluck today? Does that sound?
Yeah, that's right. I saw lots of people going to plates.
Yeah, so we'll try to be patient with them, I guess.
Tiring ordeal.
All right, well, does anybody, whoa, that's hot. Does anybody remember what we talked about last week? We did get some good feedback from everybody online about using this mic when we're talking. So good job to everybody who commented and used the mic. That was good. Yeah, anybody remember what last week was? Confession, right? Talked a little bit about corporate confession and then confessing to each other. Now here's a real stretch. What was before that? If there's nobody there, you can come in here. I know you want to hear me. That one was love. Love was the week before. Get the wheels turning a little bit. So we talked about love. We talked about confession. This week is confrontation and restoration. Preparing for this one, I don't know if I can articulate this very well, but I feel like this is, at least for me, it's super important that as a Christian community, we get this right. And hopefully today we can get some good discussion, or I'm going to be stuck up here telling more stories than I'd like to. This is really important, and I think that this topic right here, we could lead to churches splitting or a really tight community. So let's see here. I got a monitor. See if it works. Oh yeah, here's a little story to get us moving. I'll read. There's a tale of a father who had fallen out with his son. After a time, he posted this sign on the town square. Son, all is forgiven. Meet me here at sunset. At the appointed time, 75 young men showed up. So the question is, how many broken relationships among our friends and family are never repaired? Why are church splits so common? Perhaps many of us don't know how to lovingly handle conflict, reconciliation, and forgiveness. So, let's do some questions. I'll just put them all up here. Maybe not. How do you feel after an argument with a friend? John and Mike Jockey, thank you. How do we feel about after arguments? Anybody? It's going to be a fun class today.
A feeling of loss.
Loss? How so?
It may be hard to put your finger on exactly what you've lost, but if you have an argument with a friend, you've lost something. Now, what that something is, whether it's trust, whether it's, whatever, you've lost something.
All right.
And I was just going to say, don't let the sun go down on your wrath,
okay,
because it makes you sick.
That's good. Anybody else? Does anybody enjoy that? Arguments? I don't know. I think some people like arguments. Doesn't usually feel good afterwards, though. All right.
Next time.
Here's one. I think that this was supposed to be more of a personal reflection question, but if anybody wants to answer it, how do you tend to handle conflict?
Depends on whether you want to win or not.
Okay.
When we're trying to win or not win, or if we're trying to be right or not right, seems like too much of the time if I try to prove myself right with you, I'm automatically trying to prove you wrong. So it goes hand in hand. We don't think about it that way, though. So maybe if we consider what's going on to start with, we don't get into conflict as much.
Yeah, that's good.
Can I add a question on top of that? If I didn't think I was right and you were wrong, why would there even be a conflict?
For me, I avoid conflict at all costs. So I'm just like, whatever happens, happens, and maybe we just never talk again. I just don't deal with it.
I don't think you're alone there. Back to the right versus wrong. I was reading a John Maxwell book, and he's a super famous author, writer, speaker, so he's really good with his words. And he tells the story that he and his wife would get into arguments, discussions, and he would just always win. He'd always have the right thing to say to prove her wrong. And then one day, finally, she goes, "Look, John, you can be right or you can be loved." And he was like, just showing the point that, yeah, he was right, but he was
You're
losing.
a little hard to hear.
Can't hear me? All right, maybe. That's better. Okay. So, and then avoidance. I don't want to point any fingers, but I think that this is something that we should be thinking about, is what happens. Yeah, let's answer that. What happens when we avoid the conflict completely? That needs to be, like if someone does something or something happens, is there a time where we should just completely avoid that? Or should that be an option? Is it possible that maybe we shouldn't avoid that confrontation, but we do anyway? I think it's okay to think about things, for sure. Yeah.
So as a conflict avoider, your question is, should we, what happens if we avoid conflict? And I can say from experience, it's led to loss of relationship. Because if something's important enough to really bother you, but you're not brave enough to have a difficult conversation, it can just lead to broken, ended relationships.
Sure. And resentment as well.
For me, it depends upon how firm I am on a particular issue. Mm-hmm. If I ask somebody for a cup of hot chocolate and they gave me a cup of coffee, I might not even drink it. I'm not a coffee guy. I wouldn't be particularly offended, but there is a conflict. Mm-hmm. However, if I see clear evidence that you are looking down on deaf people and considering them third-class citizens, mentally disabled, and whatever else, no. On that, I will stand firm, and I will get in your face, and I will chew your nose. So look out.
So there's definitely a difference between things that we're sensitive to. So that could be part of the conflict, right? Is our own sensitivities to things and our own ideas.
I apologize for being late. I don't know if anybody already said this, but as I think of conflict personally, I feel like I personally can handle a lot more than if someone is to say something or to attack someone I love. Right? So I kind of it's easier for me to let stuff roll off my back when it's about me, because I'm like, you know what? I'm a big boy. I can handle it. Been around a long time, thick skin. Then the skin has a little bit harder time being quite as thick when it's somebody I love.
Sure, yeah. And I think that that's a good thing to note, that I think we're both of y'all are identifying, is that we all have sensitivities to certain things more than others.
We're going to work on changing the battery.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Maybe this is a little bit off track or off subject, maybe not. Maybe there's a cultural difference in the way we handle conflict. I just finished reading a book about Iraq and Iraqi people and the Muslim religion and the different sects within the Muslim religion. And the book described the differences between the Western mind, in other words, us, and the Mideastern mind. And there's an expression, forgive your enemy, but remember his name. This is a little bit like a description of the Middle Eastern mind. They may appear to have forgotten or forgiven a slight, a problem between families, whatever. But in a generation, it may come up again, and it will be just as hot then as it was before. Now, I don't know necessarily if the Western mind is like this. I don't think so. I think because of the Christian influence on the Western culture, I think we've learned a little bit about how to forgive. Maybe we need to learn a little more, but there could be cultural differences between how we deal with people.
Certainly.
And we need to understand those.
All right. I'm going to keep us going. Y'all are doing great. I want to read through some of this stuff so that we can at least get some Bible input in here to our discussion here. I think most of the passages we're going to look at today will be familiar, but let's just stir these up and try to apply them to ourselves here. This is Matthew chapter 18. We're going to read a couple of passages from here. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take 2 others with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Okay, that's the second one. So have we heard this passage before, most of us? Anybody not heard this one? Okay, so I'd like to challenge each of us. When someone has done something that we're not really happy about it, have we always followed this prescription? Mostly I'm thinking just going to the person and hashing it out without taking a detour of telling someone else. And I think it's what you said about maybe we just forget it. They upset me, this thing that they said. I'm just going to let it go. And I think that that's okay until we go and tell somebody else about what they did. And then maybe we didn't really let it go. Does anybody want to have any comments about this scenario you'd like to share?
I think it's clear that this is the little things, right? Like these are the big ones that, and so it's telling us that you have to confront it. You can't just let it fester. And this isn't those minor things that you can just let go. It's a major transgression of some kind most of the time that is going to sit and fester and bother you.
Okay, so I have an example where I had recently met someone, and if y'all have known me long enough, you know, I said something that he took offense to. He didn't tell me. He just resented me for it for several years. So we're in the same church, and he just always thought, this guy Alton, he's this way, I don't like him. And he never confessed it, or never asked me, never confronted me, until we were leaving that congregation. And then at that point, he goes, oh, I really got to try to make this right. I've let it go too long. And then we had a great conversation. He was like, hey, Alton, this is what you said. This is how it made me feel. And I said, I say a lot of dumb things. I'm sorry. And he was like, yeah, I just resented you for the last several years, and I just could never bring myself to say it. So the whole entire time, I thought we had a good relationship. It was really all based on a lie, right? It was based on the idea that I thought that we were tight. I thought that we were okay. But deep down, he had these negative feelings because of what I said. And so it just, when I look around in our church, I wonder, like, is that happening here? Did I say something else dumb to somebody else? And their feelings are hurt, and they haven't brought it to me, and they haven't even allowed me to apologize or try to set the record straight, even. I mean, have y'all heard of anything like this happening? Am I the only person? Kind of quiet today.
It's been my experience that when, you've said something that has offended someone, the offender really remembers it. And not all the time, but a lot of the time, the one who made the offense didn't even realize what they did, just like in your situation. And that's a good reminder for me as the offended to try to extend some grace. I mean, I think sometimes, like Neil was saying, there are a lot of little things that we just let get under our skin and really irritate us that really don't matter. And it comes with my perception and my background. I'm sensitive to a certain topic, right? And I like the fact that if we can realize that we're all sinful creatures, it makes it easier to do this. And then the other thing is I feel like it's easier to go to number 3 and tell the larger body than it is to go to the person. Maybe you've had an issue with your kid in the classroom, and instead of going to the parent, you go to the teacher. Where even if they're not a Christian, biblically, we're still to act that way and go to the parent, and that's hard. Because what if they think little Johnny is perfect, and they don't come from a Christian background, but that still doesn't mean that we're not called to try to mend that. And because the only person it hurts is us. I mean, it hurts us. When we hold grudges and when we can't let something go, we're the one that's hurt more so than the other. Yeah. It's not always the case when it's big things. When it's big things, everyone's hurt. But when it's these in-between things, I found that I'm the one who's losing sleep over it. I'm the one who's thinking about it all the time, and then I talk to the person and they don't even remember the conversation. So I'm the one who wasted a lot of effort and time.
And I think sometimes, back to the loss, I think that's what we can be afraid of. Like, oh, if we actually have a meaningful conversation about this, what might happen? Let's just bury it and let the poison kill me slowly. Yes, sir.
Alton, consider this, if we could, how much, and I think Abby touched on this too, how much work does it take for the one that's been offended for 7 years to keep mulling this over and hashing it back and forth every time he sees you versus going to this person and getting it straight? It's way more work to hold on to it.
I agree. And that's like one of the questions here is what wisdom is there in confronting the offender alone? I think that's that's part of it, right? It's like we don't have to sit there and deal with it for that long. Sir.
Yeah, Alton. I feel like this conversation of confronting our brother and resolving conflict really is a good plug for small groups. And I'm serious about this because I think that we're not going to know about how we possibly offended our brother or how there's a potential conflict in relationships unless we dig deep with our brothers and sisters in small groups and hash out all this stuff. So I think Christ Church needs small groups to let people try to hash this out and work all of this out. And,
Yeah, definitely agree. All right, let's read this next. So this is right after the passage that we just read. So just to be clear, we just read the part about going to your brother and then escalating as we need to. And then Jesus tells this parable. Does anybody else want to read this? It's a little bit long, but if anybody wants to or has it, they can. She'll just like how I read.
Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. But when that same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me, and I will pay you. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt.
Keep going, please.
When his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant, as I had mercy on you? And in anger his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart.
Okay, so how does this passage relate to confronting our brothers and sisters? Or maybe what point is Jesus trying to make as he followed the previous statements up?
I think he's making the point to really forgive, because it's we get, when we think about confrontation and the right way to do it, as we read in the previous scripture, take 1 or 2 with you and go, and this is to your brother who sinned against you. But then if he doesn't listen, do this, and if that doesn't listen, then this. But what he's saying here is that there is a presupposition that when you go to work it out, you listen to him or her too. Right? And that you're actually willing to forgive, right? That there needs to be, when the confrontation happens and when you hash through everything, sometimes we've held on to things for so long, we've kind of got a little pocket that they fit in inside of us. You know what I mean? And I think what he what he's telling us here is that we need to be willing to let this stuff go, and we need to be willing to really forgive, because at the end of the day, God's going to make everything right.
So let me ask a question. Should we have already made the decision to forgive our brother before we go to them? Or are we waiting to see what they say before we decide if we should forgive them or not?
I'll put it this way. When you look in the Sermon on the Mount, on when he was talking about, if your brother has sinned against you, stop what you're doing from a worship perspective, and before you go to the altar, go make it right with your brother. There's an importance to relationships that I think, as we're trying to be citizens of the kingdom, the primary relationship is between us and God, but there's also the second greatest commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Relationships matter. So I do think we need to have, generally speaking, a heart of forgiveness and a willingness to reconcile.
Good. There's a question here. How would it be possible for the forgiven man, just to be clear, like the money in this scenario is it's like $1 million and then $100. And so the question is, how would it be possible for the forgiven man to so quickly turn on his fellow servant without mercy?
Well, I had something to say about the parable too. Sorry.
Come on.
I think it's talking about like having grace because God has had so much grace with us, like how the master had grace over 10,000 denarii, but then the servant turned around over 100 and got mad. And I think that the grace that God's had with us is way bigger and is so much more important than anything that we could possibly forgive somebody else for. So like at the end of the day, yeah, he's always going to have more grace for us than we have for other people.
Perfect. Yeah, remember how forgiven we are.
I think this is very close to Matthew 7, where he's talking about judging.
Yes, please read it.
He basically says, "Judge not, lest you so be judged. For whatever, for the same, you will be judged with the same measure you use. It will be measured back to you." So this is exactly the same in my thinking.
Yeah, so when we go to confront someone, are we going to prove that we're right? Or are we going to say, I've forgiven you, but we need to... You don't like my microphone? Anyway, are we going to prove that we're right? Are we going with a heart of forgiveness to say that you've sinned against me, I forgive you, but we still need to manage our relationship here because there's still a relationship that we have to maintain if we want to be productive, especially in the church. And I think, Chuck, I was going to read that, so thank you. It's perfect. Perfect. Let's see. Okay, so we've covered some of this, and I'm going to propose some tactics. I don't have book, chapter, and verse for these, but these are some of the things that have served me well. And hopefully, with the wisdom in the room, you guys can help me formulate a better list, and we can think about how this is going to relate to us in the church as families. Heather and I have been married for a long time. I like having relationships with my children, even when they're sleepy. And, we have to do things to maintain these relationships, even when things are hard. And so I think sometimes when we're in church, we're thinking, oh, everybody loves here, everybody forgives. There shouldn't be any conflict. But I don't think that's accurate. Okay, so forgive me, let me propose these to you and explain them a little bit. We talked about this, approach each other with mercy and grace. So we're not going there to attack someone. This is a big one for me. Be gentle, but direct. If we don't explain our issue, then we're not really communicating with each other, right? So if we're shying away from what the actual issue is, that's not going to help either. Time it right. This is one I like. Like if I need to tell Heather what she's done wrong to me, probably shouldn't wait until she's worked all day, she's super tired, and actually she missed lunch and it's right before dinner time. Probably isn't the time when I should bring, oh, by the way, you did this thing, so we need to hash it out right now. And it sounds kind of silly, but I've had it happen to me, where people just pick like the most terrible time to say, hey, Alton, by the way, this thing, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, could we have some coffee or have dinner or something and talk about this? Okay, this one, let me explain it. Assume you'll be sleeping at their house that night. When I have a discussion with Heather, I know I'm going to be living with her. So I need to kind of treat the situation delicately, because I'm trying to keep this relationship, right? But I think it could be possible if it's somebody in church, we're like, well, I don't really talk to them that much, but they said this thing and I'm upset, and I don't really have to keep that relationship. I can just sit on the other side, or I sit at another table. And we think that we don't have to keep that relationship whole, and so we approach it differently. But, if you were gonna have to stay at their house, you may come up with a little more tact, be a little more gentle, a little more forgiving. And, this one, I like this one. Y'all know I'm big on my feelings here, so explain your feelings, how you feel, versus this is what you did to me. It's different. Like, hey, you said this thing, Alton, and I felt like, you thought that I was this really bad person, and now I'm really upset. But that's different than saying, hey, you said this, you meant it, you're evil, like, you better ask for forgiveness. Does that make sense? Okay, so what do y'all have? Add some good stuff to the list here. How can we keep the relationship with our brothers, like tactically, like what can we use?
If sleep on it is the correct thing, but think about what you want to say and how you want to handle it before you have the conversation or communication or that type of thing. I know that for me personally, I approach things a lot differently when I don't flap the cuff or flap the hand.
Okay, so think about what we want to say, maybe.
As I'm in transit, we've heard don't let the sun go down on your wrath, but if you're really tired, perhaps you do need to let the sun go down and get rest.
I'm just going to say pray.
Pray.
And listen to the Spirit. And I think when you do that, they help you with all of those things on the timing and the right words and all of that.
One thing is we're looking at this list and we think about the approach that was outlined on going with kind of as small a group as possible, like if the one-on-one thing doesn't work. But it all kind of speaks to how do we truly love each other well, right? Love is in agape, right? Doing something for the benefit of another. And I think as we think through the tactical ways to do this right, each one of those things up there, approach each other with mercy and grace, be gentle but direct, time it right. It's about being considerate of the other person, right? And that even goes all the way back to, in terms of how we approach, do it with as small a group as possible. Because if I'm loving someone else well, what I don't want to do is do anything. I need to care about the other person's reputation, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to bring a third party in because I love them, right? And I want to work this out, and I'm not jumping to conclusions that there's some big thing that everybody in the entire country needs to know, right? But I'm thinking about how do I love them well? And I think if we think about that, the tactics are, it all goes back to how would I want to be treated? Flip it around. I wouldn't want to be approached when I'm starving and it's the wrong time. So.
In the big scheme of things, how important is this? Is this a pet peeve that I have? And I don't even really need to bring it up. Mm-hmm. Is it truly important? Mm-hmm.
So what type of things are going to keep us from going to someone? I want to bring that question back up again, just because I feel like, based on my experience, so much can be saved to going to someone and having a conversation. But even Heather and I, we're going to celebrate our 20-year anniversary this year. and we were talking about this class, and I'm thinking of how it relates to our relationship. And, if there's something going on between us, it's still a challenge sometimes to be like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's risk being mad at each other or upsetting each other. So how can we, if we decide that the right thing to do would be to go to our brother and have a conversation, what might keep us from doing that?
I think sometimes we know the right thing to do, but arrogance and pride comes into play, and you don't want to be humble. You don't want to maybe admit that you did something wrong in the situation as well.
Yeah, isn't there I can't think of the direct quote, but maybe y'all can, but when you go to accuse somebody, you have to consider yourself less. You're also tempted, or something to that effect, right? That, hey, maybe you're wrong too. Oh, John's trying to say something back there. They're waving at me. I didn't know if they were. I can't hear you at all, John. You have to turn the mic on back there.
I would say one of the things that I've heard through counseling is the second one: be gentle and direct. The tone can really set everything apart. For example, me and you are talking, and I get really loud, and you don't like it. It may just be me talking and not realizing that you're taking it as something much more aggressive than what I'm really meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely the tone that we use when we talk to people is important. Robert's got something. Getting your steps in today, John. Thank you.
Piggyback on that. This one's actually for guys like me and John who are a little on the larger side. This is something that I've only recently become aware of, but when you're a male and you're tall, that tends to say more than your words ever do. And so perhaps get yourself down smaller, don't be as aggressive in your stance, maybe sitting next to each other instead of across from each other or something. Mm-hmm. And then giving plenty of physical space.
Yeah, I think that's good. I didn't really think about that, but I know with me, and I'll just keep bringing my relationship up because that's what I know, but usually if Heather and I have to hash something out, we just go for a walk. And it's a lot easier to talk instead of all right, you sit there and I'm going to sit here and, face to face. It's a face off here. That maybe we're just going to walk and share. Yes, sir.
I wrote something down probably 15 years ago that I keep. And that is, when we communicate with people, only 7% of the words are really communicated. 38% is the tone, and 55% is the body language. So they don't hear the words always. They might hear our tone and our body language.
Yeah, I've heard a saying too that's people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. That's true for me.
Another tactic is you've got a problem. And if you can consider, this is the problem. Okay, it's not you, it's this problem. Okay, and you put it out here, and you and me and this problem. And we address the problem as a third entity in the situation. And then that way, any kind of attack to the problem is not an attack on the person, and they're less defensive, at least tend to.
Yeah, it's hard to control other people's responses, right? But I think we've covered quite a few things as far as tactics, and then just the ideas of loving each other. I thought about saying, when you confront someone, you should confront them like they're part of your family. But then I also reflected on sometimes how I've treated my own family and thought maybe that's not the best idea. But I think that this is really important. So I hope that we can consider this and consider our role and how we can get better in this area specifically. I've been a part of a couple of church splits, and or at least just been near them or very familiar. And I feel like this can be a seed that leads to something, a harvest that we don't want. And when it's a small little seed, it's kind of unassuming and little, but it's also really a lot easier to deal with when it's small than little. But then if we ignore it and let it grow out of control, it's not good. And speaking from my own experience, even when people have come up and said things to me, I'm sure they were thinking, I'm risking this, Alton's gonna get upset, he's crazy and he's gonna fly out the handle. But actually for me, it was a really great learning experience. And it's led me to, I think, offend people less as I've gotten older. I remember one class, I just said something like, oh yeah, if we want to help somebody, it's easy to write a check and take care of it, but the hard part's like, getting your hands dirty and actually doing the work. And I just meant, hey, sometimes, like, this is hard. I'm trying to emphasize the hard work. We should do the hard work. Well, afterwards, somebody came up to me and said, hey, Alton, we can barely afford our car payment and we're short on cash, and you're just talking about how easy it is to write a check to fix things, and I'm offended. So I'm like, oh, there I go again with my mouth. But it taught me, like, okay, well, every time I open my mouth, I may be messing something up, and I'm still getting better. So point being, trying to encourage us all to receive it well, but also be willing to believe that maybe this is the opportunity that you've been given to help someone else grow in their faith. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a knockdown, drag out thing, but that we can both grow. And generally, if you have a good conversation with somebody, you get closer. And I think that that's what we're talking about here in our class, is building a better community. And a real community is going to be tight. Next week, and I believe the final week of this class, is a haven for healing. So talking about our community and how we can help each other heal. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.